So we've had a lot of tips about pricing, distributing. If you could give new writers some street tips about writing itself, what would they be?
So I guess I'll adjust that question in the sense that when it comes to actually putting words on your screen, if you're at that point, I don't have very many tips for you because at that point, hopefully you've done the preparation before to think about the topics, to become an expert in something, to really think about how you're going to be differentiated. And then the words on the screen or writing the words on the screen should actually come very, very easily. And,
Mhm.
I could tell you like use some of the tools like Readwise or Draftback or whatever to like make that process easier. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I know tons of people who write articles in a text editor and other people who are using 50 different tools to make their writing process better. So I don't actually care as much about that, but I guess to give some tips on the precursor to sitting down in that desk. One of them is what we've talked about before. Make sure that if you're going to write about something that you are an expert and you don't have to be like the Olympic athlete of that particular space, but you know something very, very well. You've thought about it and
Mhm.
you have almost like an angle to talk about that particular topic in a way that other people haven't. So, for example, it can be just as simple as you're just a lot funnier about that topic. You're a lot more deeply researched. You're contrarian in the way you talk about that topic. But in order to even get to those points of differentiation, you need to know that topic very well. So that's the first piece of feedback or tip is that you really should know about a topic a lot. And that also feeds into this idea of like being passionate about it and wanting to write it, and therefore the writing coming more easily. The second thing, I know this is simple, but I would tell people not to overthink this whole writing process. And again, if you know something very, very well, it shouldn't be this like big elaborate thing where you have to read 50 books in order to figure out how to write about this thing effectively. You should know what the gaps are. The same way that I talked about remote work before, I knew what the gaps were because I had been in that space and I'd been studying it and I'd been reading all of the other information out there, and I noticed something. There was like a seed where I was like, there's stuff missing. And so you should have that same instinct as you're writing. If you're writing just to write, so I guess this would be the second tip, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But I would caution people who kind of jump on the bandwagon where they say, "Oh, everyone has a newsletter. I'm going to create a newsletter." Or
Mhm.
everyone has a podcast. I'm going to create a podcast. Because at the end of the day, all of these mediums, all of them are competitive. That does not mean that you can't succeed in them, but you do have to differentiate in some way. And so I would say that if you find yourself saying that as a person or a company, I see companies do this all the time where they're like, "Oh, well, I guess it's time to have a blog." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Well, what do you have to say? Do you have something unique to say?" So I guess that would be a second point. And then I'm trying to think through, I mean, I guess the third thing that I'll say is not specific to writing itself, but it relates to the long-term viability of writing is that as unnatural it is for many writers, you have to focus on distribution, and that distribution effort should be roughly equivalent to the time you spend writing. And, you can
Mhm.
argue that it shouldn't be 50-50, maybe it should be 70-30 or whatever, but the point is what most people do when they create content is they spend 95, if not 99% of their effort creating that content, and then, the equivalent or the opposite of that in distributing their content.
Mhm.
And ultimately, that's important to reverse or to balance out because if you're not putting your work out there, no one's going to know about it. And I can bet you anything that even if you think you love writing, if you do it for a year and no one's reading your work,
Mhm.
you're going to give up and it's going to be really demoralizing. And I would just remind people if they, disagree with me on this topic that your favorite artists, your favorite creators are probably good at creating. They may even be great at creating, but I can guarantee that they're great at distributing. That's how they've reached you. That's how you know about them. And there's a ton of other creators who are probably more talented than them, hiding in their basement, spending
Mhm.
all their time creating, but no time distributing. And you don't know who those people are.